Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast presented by Yahoo Fantasy. I'm John Macri, joined as always by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. Nate, we are in the thick of it now. We just had the Hall of Fame game last week. NFL preseason kicks off in earnest here for the rest of the teams starting on Thursday. And then obviously throughout the weekend. This is it. This is kind of crunch time now, and fantasy football draft season is here. So how are you doing?
Doing well. We are definitely in the crunch of it now. Like this past weekend, I'm like, this is the last Sunday without football for the rest of the year, basically, or the last weekend, because there's that one weekend where there's no preseason, but we do get college football that weekend. So our weekends are gone. Our Thursday nights are gone. Even my last night was gone because Keenan Allen signed with the Chargers. So I had to update the rankings, update the projections, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, that was a good one last night, and then we'll get into it because one of the players we're talking about today is directly affected by that. But this is it. This is the busiest time of the year here. Obviously, the NFL being back and new information coming every single week now, and we're going to try to update everybody on the podcast as much as we can throughout the preseason, and then obviously week to week in season as well. But this week we're talking high risk, high reward players, Nate. And so these are guys who I guess heading into this season have a shot to either greatly outperform their ADPs or significantly disappoint, right? Depending on their very wide range of outcomes and just the players themselves as well, and kind of the many potential ways that they could be used within their offense. So I think this is going to be a fun one. We're going to highlight some players with strong upside cases to kind of greatly outperform their ADP, but they don't come without risk of their other likely outcome, which is that of a low floor play, and definitely lower than where they're currently being valued in drafts as well. So should be a fun one to work through. I really like this exercise. But before we get into the names, Nate, with the NFL season being so close and preseason week 1 starting up this week, I need to let everybody know that this is your last chance to get in on the early bird pricing sale for a PFF Plus subscription, because that is only running until Thursday of this week. So once the first slate of preseason games wrap this week, it will be too late. And this is super important because we all know fantasy leagues are firing up, Nate, and we've been spending months on 2025 draft prep so that the listeners and readers can get in and prep as quickly and easily as possible. So if you want to get in on PFF Plus, now is truly the time to do so. Use the code EARLYBIRD. You'll get an annual subscription for just $79.99 if you get in that code before the end of Thursday, August 7th. It comes out to just $666 a month. That's $40 off a subscription for the year for PFF Plus, so that you can dominate your leagues and or smash bets from week 1 through the 2026 draft. That means you'll get access to fantasy tools, betting dashboards, matchup charts, player grades, all of the unbeatable features that you can only find at PFF. It's a major edge, and there is a reason that it's the same data that NFL teams use to prepare each and every week. You'll also get access to the many articles that we write each week that Trevor and Dalton and Max and our many great talents right here, and packs all of the data into these contextual pieces that highlight some of the standout players every single week and throughout the year. So again, the PFF Plus early bird deal ends August 7th. I can't stress enough. You don't want to miss it before it's too late. Now is really the best time to do so. So get in there, go to subscribe.pff.com and use code EARLYBIRD. All right, Nate, let's get into our list of high risk, high reward players for fantasy football in 2025. We have 4 wide receivers, 3 running backs, and a tight end who we wanted to highlight. So let's start with the wide receiver position, and the name being drafted the earliest that we have on this list at the position. Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers makes the list. And to be fair, we had him on the list before the Keenan Allen signing, so I'm sure that could play a part in, the concerns that you might have with McConkey, who is going as wide receiver 11 on Yahoo right now, typically going end of round 2, start of round 3.
To be fair, when I was pitching McConkey as a player for us to talk about, I did mention maybe Keenan Allen signs, and then it did end up happening. But even outside of that, I have been concerned throughout the offseason because of the changes the Chargers have made on offense with Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator. We have seen throughout his time as an offensive coordinator in the NFL with San Francisco, with Buffalo, with Baltimore, they've had very run-heavy offenses. They've had the second fewest passes to wide receivers, and those places. So they have made a heavy emphasis on the run game this offseason after trying it early last season. It not working out for them switching to the passing game a bit more, but they added Omarion Hampton, Najee Harris at running back. They have two of the top three tight ends have changed this season. They added to the offensive line as well, so they definitely want to run the ball more this season. I don't think it will be as run heavy as we've seen in the past because they have Justin Herbert at quarterback, which is different than some of the other quarterbacks Greg Roman has had. So still expect them to have a little bit more of a balanced offense, but we know McConkey is capable of excellent fantasy production. He averaged 20.7 PPR points per game over his last 8 games, and then had that 9-catch, 197-yard, 1 touchdown performance in the playoffs. So we know he's capable of doing great things, but I am concerned about that decrease in routes run because they're going to be running the ball more often. And then now they added Keenan Allen. I'm not concerned about the fact that Allen plays in the slot and McConkey plays in the slot. Both players have played very well when lined up out wide. McConkey even has more yards per route run when lined up out wide compared to the slot. And we also know Keenan Allen isn't quite the same player that he was even 2 years ago. Looking at his tracking data, his speed wasn't quite there last year compared to all the other years in his career. So not concerned about that, but that is another wide receiver that Justin Herbert has trust in, has chemistry with. So just the fact that there is another capable wide receiver, and they added Trey Harris, who hopefully will be an upgrade over what they had last year. So there should be at least a little bit more competition for targets at wide receiver, a little more competition for targets at tight end, whether it's Tyler Conklin or Omarion Hampton, or even Will Dissly, who had a touchdown in the Hall of Fame game in his one drive. But I think there'll be more competition. I think there'll be more run games. So I think that'll be less opportunities. But of course, McConkey could also just improve in his second season. So I ended up moving him down my rankings just a little bit after what happened yesterday. I was considering him late second round, early third round. Now I'm probably more towards the mid to late third round. In terms of wide receivers, moved him below T. Higgins. So that's one wide receiver I moved ahead of him. I also moved Garrett Wilson, who I also think is in an offense that will be running the ball a lot, but I think Garrett Wilson has less competition for targets. So even though there's not as strong quarterback play, I think just the volume of targets will be higher for Garrett Wilson than it will McConkey this season.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Like I think even like for me with McConkey, it's not that I don't believe in him like as a player. I think he's very good and a very strong fantasy asset. It's just like even before at least before the Keenan Allen signing, where he was being drafted, I ended up feeling a little bit better about some of the other options in that draft range and potentially some of the other wide receivers as well, like where he was going on Yahoo here, like end of round 2, early round 3. Like this is the Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, or Trey McBride range. Those are the guys that I think have the like kind of best shot at elite upside for their position, while McConkey, being a wide receiver, is a lot more competition for that outcome, right? And again, not to say that he's not a good option or capable of returning that starting fantasy value, but like you pointed out, there's risk there as well. And for me, it's about the players that I'm potentially leaving on the table by taking McConkey here. And I think now with the Keenan Allen signing, we probably do see that ADP come down a little bit. So that helps. But like you said, there's still other things to kind of keep in mind here, right? There's a potentially even more run heavy approach from the Chargers, obviously Keenan Allen, but maybe Trey Harris can, emerge as a really nice option in year 1. So that added target competition absolutely creates a risk. And, yeah, I think, the reward side of it obviously is that Keenan Allen doesn't look like he did and continues to decline after a down year last year, right? And, maybe they aren't able to lean as heavily into the run game as they like because they were still, top 10 last year and McConkey was still an elite fantasy wide receiver, right? Like you mentioned, from week 8 on last year, he led all rookie wide receivers in fantasy production over that stretch and was the PPR wide receiver 8 through that stretch there. So he absolutely holds the level of volume and productivity. But I think if you're drafting right now, I think the first hurdle we now have to avoid is obviously Keenan Allen and what that offense is going to look like with him there. And then obviously the run stuff as well for for that offense, and then whether or not, you know, one of the young guys emerges as another threat in terms of target share, whether it's Trey Harris or on Gadsden, right? Whoever these young receiving options end up being. So McConkey kind of has like, I guess we could call them like hurdles to clear as the season kind of goes on for him to kind of get an idea of what his season's going to look like, right? It starts with, what does Keenan Allen look like right away? What does the offense look like as far as being able to run the ball consistently throughout the year? And then what about these young guys? Are they going to emerge and start earning a larger role in the latter half of the season? So there's definitely, you know, potential for McConkey if he can avoid all of those things. But I think where he's being drafted right now, I'd much rather go for some other options as well.
There, I'll add Quentin Johnston. There has been some general positive
Right.
buzz about him throughout training camp, and also he did get to rest in the Hall of Fame game, just being one of the starters who got to rest. So that also speaks to them still viewing Johnston as a starter. So I'm not expecting huge leaps from him, but even just a little bit also just chips away from McConkey's targets. And then I also, just to go on a tangent for a little bit, we talked about last week the trouble I have at times with Jamar Chase at the 101 because of having trouble finding running backs in the second and third round, and having Ladd McConkey as someone that I was considering with that 212, 301 spot. And now McConkey's not there. We also had the news of Kyron Williams signing the extension with the Los Angeles Rams. So now I'm not worried about Williams getting traded, less worried about Williams getting benched. Now he is someone that I could probably consider at that 212, 301 range. So it's kind of surprising how much things can change over the course of a week. We just had that conversation a week ago, and now one fewer wide receiver, one more running back, and all of a sudden that draft strategy changes around that draft pick. So I think one of the important things while you're preparing for your fantasy drafts is definitely make sure you're keeping up with the most up-to-date news. Make sure the stuff that you're reading is up-to-date as well, because even things around draft strategy and what you should be doing with your drafts this time of year, that strategy is constantly changing based on what can happen, based on ADP movement, based on injuries, based on news like this with the Keenan Allen signing or the Kyron Williams extension. So that impacts draft strategy, not just around what to do with that player, but the draft strategy all around that player, because you're trying to maximize talent at all of the positions. So when something happens at one position, it impacts things at all the other positions.
Yeah, no, that's a great point for sure. And yeah, the Kyron Williams thing was huge, right? Because there was plenty of reason for people to fade him, you know, whether it was Jarquez Hunter or Blake Corum, right, that people liked and potentially eating into that role. But, you know, a really nice contract extension provides a lot of encouragement that he's still going to be a big part of that offense, right? And definitely it's hard to ignore that and make you feel or at least should make you feel better about Kyron Williams for this season as well. So moving on here, Nate, we couldn't do a high risk, high reward episode without covering maybe the most high risk, high reward player of 2025 heading into the year. I'm talking, of course, about the wide receiver cornerback hybrid Travis Hunter of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he is being drafted late 6th round at this point. So it's not like his price tag is absurd or anything like that, but that doesn't mean that even with that ADP, he doesn't come with risk, right? And while some of that risk is baked into his ADP right now, the fact of the matter is we are almost entirely in the dark in regards to what Hunter's usage is going to look like in 2025. Like, this is a truly unprecedented situation here for fantasy because he's expected to play both sides of the ball, and we don't know just how much that'll be for each of the offense and defensive positions. So he could end up playing just situationally on offense and get utilized more on defense. He could end up playing near full-time wide receiver and just show up situationally on defense, as well as a number of outcomes in between, right? And the other part of it is that what we get one week from Hunter may not be what we get the next week, right? So he could become totally untrustworthy for fantasy. And now that 6th round ADP, it doesn't feel as good, right? So that's the risk for me. But personally, like, I'm still drawn to the reward because where he's being drafted right now around guys like George Pickens and Caleb Johnson, Bo Nix, even like defense and special teams. I don't think those guys and their upside is enough to scare me off of taking a swing at Hunter for his upside, right? Like, I think right now the assumption and projection is that he's going to be utilized as a wide receiver first, which is what we wanted since before draft time, obviously for fantasy purposes. And if we put any stock into unofficial depth charts, which obviously we shouldn't get too invested in, they at least don't dissuade that notion that he, after he's listed as a starting wide receiver and backup cornerback. So at least that's better than the other way around. And for me, I guess I'm mostly working on the assumption that Hunter is going to play around 75 to 80% at wide receiver, maybe around 40% at corner. Obviously, this is just my own personal projection, and we don't know for sure since, again, it's an unprecedented situation. But I'm trying to think about what makes sense from a coaching and team perspective. And this is a player that they obviously invested heavily into acquire via trade during the draft, which tells me he's going to be a massive part of their season in year one. And even at 75 to 80% at wide receiver, like the potential to get him involved with design touches and being a go-to target in the Liam Cohen offense alongside Brian Thomas Jr. is what we're looking at for potential wide receiver one upside, at the very least high end wide receiver two upside at a wide receiver three cost. So while there's risk of him not even returning the wide receiver three price, I think the potential for him to outperform that price is still a little greater than everyone else being drafted around him, if all goes according to plan, which again, we will have to find out how that goes this season, but that's how I'm treating him. How are you looking at Travis Hunter right now?
Oh, yeah, I'd say I'm also high on him at this point. I don't feel like I've really changed him in my rankings that much over the past month or two, and he's been showing up more and more in my perfect draft articles. So I think that's speaking to ADP sometimes changing with him, or at least the ADP for the wide receivers that I like around him also changing at times. I will say, like, I think one shout out to the beat writers in general right now. You've been a huge asset to everything that we do in the fantasy community, specifically for this. John Shipley, who's been pretty consistently reporting on Travis Hunter, talked about how on Tuesday in practice, like they were doing team drills. He played on offense, switched jerseys to play on defense, switched jerseys back to play on offense again without leaving the field. So it's pretty clear that he's going to be playing significantly on both sides of the ball. Also talked about how he's nearly impossible to cover, which part of that is because he can't play on both offense and defense at the same time, so he can't cover himself, so they don't have the cornerbacks to cover him. But I do think Liam Cohen said something pretty interesting in a press conference earlier this week of how they've kind of been focusing him on 11 personnel on offense, and he's still learning that wide receiver role in 12 personnel, which might show a little bit of a hand of what they're thinking of using him for on offense, consistently playing him in 11 personnel, not as much in 12 personnel, which we see a lot with slot receivers at times, which can be a little bit troubling. But I think if he's just now starting to learn some of the 12 personnel stuff, I could see him playing sometimes in 12 personnel. So that's probably where he gets to that maybe 80% snap rate on offense, is playing pretty consistently in 11 and sometimes in 12. And I think that can work for fantasy. I compare that to what Miami's been doing with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle for the past couple seasons. They take them out at times in 12 personnel, which are more often run plays, sometimes pass plays here and there. So you don't see Hill and Waddle with the same route numbers as you see some other elite wide receivers, but you still see them be very efficient with their routes, not so much last season, but the earlier season. So I think that's a pretty optimistic look for what Hunter can be, is how the Dolphins have been using their wide receivers in recent seasons. But I do think he will play significantly on defense as well. It'll just depend on how much he handles. But the downside is, like you said, what if his usage is changing throughout the season? Maybe it's they like this matchup this one week, but then this other week they want him more on defense because they think they need more help on defense. Or how does that change? Because I think at wide receiver, the Jaguars have the flexibility at who they can put at what positions with all of their other wide receivers, that they can survive with Hunter not being on the field and have the wide receivers who can play the right roles to make the offense still work. So I think that's the concern, is if he has that week where he's playing more on defense than offense, and we don't know that week is coming ahead of time, if we can't predict how they're going to use him from one week to another, then it becomes harder to trust him in your starting lineup. So perfectly fine in best ball to take a chance on him, perfectly fine in DFS, which is kind of a trend for all of the players we're talking about, or at least most of them, is that they might be players who are better in best ball because you can take their highs without worrying as much about their lows.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. It also depends on your format, right? And like you said too, like if he is going to play only in 11 personnel, say, or mostly in 11 personnel, like the nice thing too is we at least have a tendency for Liam Cohen to run a lot of 11 personnel. Like I believe his Tampa Bay Bucks last year were top 10 in that regard, right? So I'd imagine that transfers over. It's not like it's the Baltimore Ravens or something like that where they're among the bottom of the league, but I think there's still potential there. And yeah, I can't wait. I really want to see like the start percentage for Travis Hunter in fantasy leagues on week 1 compared to week 2, because it's either going to jump dramatically or it's going to go down dramatically, right? Like I think there's going to be a different again, a wide range of outcomes there for him. So a very exciting player, very excited to see how things shake out this year. And obviously we'll be tracking that all season long. But Nate, next up, a player whose usage is no question really whatsoever, as long as he's healthy. Chris Olave is the wide receiver 1 for the New Orleans Saints offense, but after serious concussion concerns last season that got him shut down for the year, he at least becomes a greater risk for re-injury and missing significant time. So while he's only being drafted as like the wide receiver 34 right now on Yahoo in the 8th round, the risk is, I'd say, pretty baked in. But what are the chances you think he can make it through this year in order to deliver on the reward?
Yeah, so I think there's a pretty decent chance that he can stay healthy throughout the season. Like, it's a bigger risk that he gets injured than everyone else because of that concussion history and the length of time he would miss if he suffers another concussion. But I think there's some pretty big positives of he had the 16 fantasy points per game in 2023. He's been among the elite players in terms of yards per route run, in terms of target rate in recent seasons, and I don't see that changing with the Saints offense. They haven't really changed their weapons too much, so that shouldn't change, but they did change the coaching staff. And with Kellen Moore, I could see Olave playing more in the slot this season than we've seen in the past. And we've seen Kellen Moore's slot receivers. They've changed over the years as he's changed offenses, but they pretty consistently scored between 15 and 21 PPR points per game. So that is fairly positive and definitely better than where he's currently getting drafted. Olave has more yards per route run in the slot compared to out wide over the past couple seasons, even though he's played more out wide. And then his primary competition at wide receiver is Rashid Shaheed, who has 2.27 yards per route run when lined up out wide compared to 1.49 in the slot. So it makes sense for Olave to play in the slot. So I could very well see that happening this year. But like you said, the concussions are a big concern. The quarterback situation is a big concern. It doesn't look like anyone's kind of won the job for them yet. So, but we have also seen plenty of great fantasy wide receivers have subpar quarterback play and have great seasons. Thinking like to the Giants last year with Malik Neighbors. The Giants, like they got rid of Daniel Jones and then rotated a bunch of different quarterbacks, trying them out and them not working. And Malik Neighbors was still a top 10 fantasy wide receiver last season. That wasn't a problem. So even though it's not ideal, just generally the better the quarterback is, the better you're going to do as a receiver. I don't think that's as big of a factor as some people are making it out to be when it comes to his ADP. And then I'll also note, like, it's interesting that there really hasn't been that much buzz about, not buzz, but like information about Olave in general. On July 22nd, Kellen Moore said he's good to go. He's been at practice. Basically, most of what I found is just a random camp video or two of him making a big play, but there hasn't been as much talk about him. It might just be there's less Saints beat writers in general writing about things, so that could impact things as well. But it would be nice to know if he is going to get that slot work or not, and that could definitely help either enforce my opinions on Chris Olave as being one of the best values in the draft, or it could make me less optimistic about Olave if it sounds like someone else is going to be taking those slot snaps.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, like it might not be one that we know until week 1, right? Like I wouldn't be surprised if they held him out of the preseason, just obviously considering the concussion history and stuff like that. So, but yeah, like the concussions, they're definitely a concern. They'll be something that we kind of have to be aware of almost every week that he's in our lineup. But if he can overcome those concerns, then I think he should still be able to outperform that ADP of wide receiver 34 right now, even with like question marks around the offense and the quarterback. Like you said, there's no real question that I think Olave is the most talented wide receiver or receiving option in this offense, and like a true wide receiver one candidate again if he can stay healthy. And from what we saw from him last year too, and his 2 years prior, we're talking about a floor of being a PPR wide receiver two for fantasy, and he's not even being drafted close to that, right? So that's obviously because of the concussions. But last year, before he got hurt, he had improved his receiving grade, yards per route run, first down touchdown rate from the year prior, which the year prior to that was his best fantasy finish of his career so far. So I don't know that it matters all that much who wins between Tyler Shough and Spencer Rattler. I don't really have a preference at quarterback, because either way, Olave is going to be the top target by far. And again, as long as he's healthy, should be the clear leader in receiving production for them this year. And for a player of his talents, like that should definitely result in a better finish than the wide receiver four. And obviously, if he does get another concussion, then there's the risk of him being shut down. And that's where that wide receiver 34 risk no longer even becomes in range. So yeah, those are things we got to kind of worry about. But I'm with you. I generally tend to feel more optimistic about Olave this year.
I'd add, I think there's like value in having knowledge, which I don't think we'll have with some of the players we're talking about later on, of knowing if you can put them in your fantasy starting lineup. With the concussion thing, like there's no game where you're going to feel he's more at risk of suffering a concussion than another game. So if you have him, you're probably putting him in your starting lineup as long as he's healthy. And then if he suffers that concussion, then you're not starting him for as long as he's out for. So you at least have the knowledge of, can you put him in your lineup or not? Where other guys, like we were talking about Travis Hunter, there's at least the concern that we don't know if his usage is going to change from one week to another in a way that we don't know about with other, or don't have that problem with other players. Like other players, we don't know how they're going to rotate with another player at their same position, which we'll get into some of those kind of players later on. But at least with Olave, he's going to be the top weapon in the offense or in the passing game as long as he's healthy. And then if he's not healthy, then he's not.
Makes perfect sense. And then our last wide receiver is another one coming off of injury, who was also delivering a strong fantasy season prior to his injury last year. Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's going right in that same range as Olave, wide receiver 30-ish, around the 8th round of fantasy drafts on Yahoo at the moment. But Godwin suffered a dislocated ankle in week 7 last year. That ended his season, obviously, right now. So the hope is that he's ready to come back week 1, but there's no guarantee that he will be available week 1 right now. Last I checked, they're saying that he has a chance to be ready for week 1, which is anything but a guarantee, and has me at least somewhat hesitant that he'll be good to go. The other aspect of it is that even if he is ready for week 1 or slightly after, he's probably unlikely to hit the ground running and could very well kind of be eased back into the offense, especially with them spending a first-round pick on a wide receiver like Emeka Egbuka, who's in play as a really good placeholder option. So there's no real rush to force Godwin back to like the workload that he was on last year, at least early in the season, right? And then obviously there's the risk that if Egbuka plays well enough, that maybe they don't need to feature Godwin as heavily for the entire season. But that's the risk, right? The reward being that prior to his dislocated ankle last year, he was the PPR wide receiver 2 overall. So it had been a while since we saw a top 5 fantasy wide receiver version of Chris Godwin, like back in 2019. But last year he was at least proving that he's still capable of getting there in the right offense and with the right usage as he went back to playing primarily out of the slot again. So now that upside is probably unlikely, that level anyways, as we're like wide receiver 2, especially coming off injury, and for all the reasons that I just mentioned as well. But if he gets out there week 1, that's obviously a big step, because it means that Egbuka doesn't necessarily get a large role that Godwin will have to take back, and it gives him more time to kind of ramp up and get back to full speed as well. If that's the case, then he can absolutely outperform his wide receiver 30 plus ADP and will challenge to potentially be the team's leader in receiving production with Mike Evans. And that could mean top 15-ish type upside. The question is, like with all these players, is whether you're willing to kind of take that risk. But what say you, Nate? Where are you at with Godwin?
I've been like slowly but surely moving him down my rankings. First up, I'm concerned about the injury and him not playing at least those potentially first couple weeks of the season. Earlier this week, their GM said he's doing very well and plenty of positive things, like every coach or GM says when a guy is coming back from injury, but added at the end that we've still got a ways to go. It's been sounding less and less optimistic that he will be ready for week 1. So it will be those couple of weeks, it sounds like. And then part of my thought is how or what are they going to do with Ekbuka in general this season? Maybe they just teach him that out wide slot and have him compete with Jalen McMillan, and then have like Sterling Shepard play in the slot until Godwin's ready to go again. But it sounds like Ekbuka's been playing primarily in the slot, at least according to Scott Reynolds over at Pewter Report. So it sounds like Ekbuka should be their primary slot receiver until Godwin is ready to come back. Like as you said, we shouldn't take too much stock into the unofficial depth charts, but Ekbuka was the backup slot receiver to Chris Godwin on that depth chart as well. So I expect Ekbuka to be that slot receiver until Chris Godwin's back. And if Ekbuka is playing well, then I don't know if there's going to be as much of a point to get Godwin back into the lineup very quickly. And if Ekbuka is playing excellently, then Godwin maybe is a backup for a decent amount this season, which would not be great for his fantasy value. Of course, the upside is if he does get back and he's healthy, he was excellent in terms of fantasy production last year. So there is at least a chance he gets back to that. But it kind of feels like the opposite of Chris Olave in terms of, even though they're getting drafted in a similar spot, it's like you can trust Olave until all of a sudden he's doing nothing for you. Where Godwin, it's like there's probably a decent chance that he can't be a fantasy starter for you, but if things go right, then he could be a top 10 option yet again for fantasy purposes. So Godwin's upside is probably higher than Chris Olave's, but I think there is a much larger chance of him not being a fantasy starter this season because Ekbuka is there. Ekbuka is playing in the slot. The two are probably competing for one spot on offense a lot of the time. And if Godwin isn't practicing, Ekbuka gets all of those reps with the ones right now. He has that time to gain chemistry with Baker Mayfield. He's going to have that time those first couple weeks of the season to gain more chemistry with Baker Mayfield. So the fact that Ekbuka is playing in the slot, not playing out wide, not competing with Jalen McMillan seems relatively safe for that third spot and 3 wide receiver sets this season, which is good for Jalen McMillan, but bad for Godwin in this case.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, and then obviously Mike Evans, we know how much they want him to get another 1,000-yard season as well, so they're going to try to feed him the ball as much as possible, which, you know, if the other guys are competing for snaps, that doesn't help any of their cases either. But before we go any further, I want to let you all know that this episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. There is never a better reminder of that than the presence of the NFL preseason, which is always accompanied by the many, many fantasy football drafts that we take part in every year. And this year, Nate and I are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first timer or veteran making your millionth league. I've mentioned it before, but I love playing on Yahoo because they not only let me play 5 separate IDP positions, but they also have the super fun rating system as well, just adding to the competitiveness that goes along with playing fantasy football. And honestly gives me an extra sense of achievement holding, you know, diamond rating and maintaining that status every year. Just a nice added touch by Yahoo that you don't get anywhere else. So to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. So with the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, or you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. So stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/PFF. That is yahoofantasy.com/PFF. Okay, let's move on to the non-wide receiver picks that we had who offer high risk, high reward. And again, I feel like we couldn't do this episode without including Christian McCaffrey, who comes with the highest cost of all the players that we'll talk about today as a late first round pick on Yahoo and the RB5 overall, according to the ADP. So Nate, obviously we have the injury concerns with CMC, but it's not like his price has fallen too far from last year's 101. He's still going in the first round because we know the upside is truly elite. But how comfortable are you with him heading into 2025 at that price right now?
I'm generally fine with a top 5 price tag at running back. I think my only concern is typically late first round. I'm more looking at wide receiver than running back. His ADP on Yahoo right now is at 9.9, but if you put the players in order, he is the 8th player going off the board just because there's so much disagreement with who should be picked in what order at the end of the first round, with guys like Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, all within one of Christian McCaffrey in terms of average ADP at the moment. So lots of options in that range. He is someone that it seemed like pretty clear about 2 months ago that he is back and ready to go in, at least healthy right now, which is not the case with some of the players that we're talking about today, like Chris Godwin. So there really hasn't been much talk of him in terms of like what beat writers are saying or what the coaches are saying with McCaffrey right now, because like in training camp, he's not getting used a ton, but that's generally true for veteran players that are older and have a history with injuries. Like you don't need to work them that much in training camp. So it's not surprising that there's not much being talked about him in terms of coaches and beat reporters at the moment. So not too concerned that way. It's just the normal, like we're worried about him injuring himself again, which luckily it's been different injuries that he's dealt with. So it's not like there's a particular part of his body that's consistently getting injured. So that at least helps the injury concern a little bit. But the fact that he's had so many injuries and has missed over half the season in 3 of the past 5 years is still concerning. And then there's always the thought that they should decrease his workload to help prevent him from getting injured, in which case he might not be that same top 5 fantasy running back. But a lot of that, it feels like it's coming from everyone else except for the organization. I've seen beat writers saying they should do this. I've seen fantasy analysts say that they should do this. But the 49ers have seemed pretty adamant of keeping McCaffrey's workload. We won't know that for sure until week 1, because I highly doubt we see him at any point in the preseason. So we're probably not going to get any more information about if we should be drafting McCaffrey until week 1 happens. Only other small thing is I don't think the offensive line is quite as good as it was during McCaffrey's peak time with the 49ers. It's still one of the better run blocking offensive lines in the league, but mostly just Trent Williams is also getting way up there in age for a left tackle. Still a very effective left tackle, just not at that same very elite level that we haven't really seen from a left tackle any other time in the past 20 years. He's not at that level anymore, but he's still very, very good.
Yeah, I'm with you. And look, I mean, the biggest concern for McCaffrey, it's always going to be around his health, right? Last year wasn't the only season, like you said, of his career to be shortened by injury. But if he's healthy, he possesses that kind of lottery winning upside for anybody that's able to grab him in our drafts, potentially early second round, depending on where you're drafting. We saw what he did as recently as 2023. He averaged 24.7 PPR points per game on 21.9 opportunities per game. Obviously was the overall RB1. That's why he was being drafted as the 101 heading into 2024. So it's that workload, it's that efficiency on what should be a much better 49ers offense this year, assuming everyone is healthy again, that we're willing to pay for McCaffrey. And if he gets even close to that, he's at least a locked in RB1 every single week without a second thought, right? The problem is that we're basically already paying, I think, sticker value on CMC, because while RB1 is overall is still a possibility, it probably makes a lot more sense that the 49ers manage him and his workload at least a little bit more this year to ensure that he stays healthy, right? Like you mentioned, they haven't, come out and expressed that they're going to lighten his workload or anything, but it only makes sense for a team, because for that team specifically, because the offense obviously would be losing a massive piece again if he goes down. And I'm sure they don't want to miss the playoffs again with CMC, his injury being the catalyst for that. So I have to imagine that they're smarter about managing his workload, especially late in games that maybe they are in control of this season. So that's part of it for me, at least, that makes me think that he's much more appropriately valued as like RB5-ish at this point in his career. And RB1 overall is maybe less likely. And then obviously re-injury or anything catastrophic like that means he's much worse. So I really don't know how much more he has to give at this point in his career. But I guess what I'm saying is that I'm still fine betting on him as like RB5, RB6 in that range here in 2025. And like you said, more closer to that second round, because I think that level of usage and production is still going to be there for him as long as he's healthy. I just don't know that it's necessarily RB1 overall. So this is about the range that I'd have him projected anyways, assuming he's healthy.
To play a little bit of devil's advocate of like, yeah, they want him to be healthy, so if they make the playoffs, they can use him in the playoffs. They might really need him to make the playoffs with the things that have been going on in that offense recently. Like Brandon Ayuk, it doesn't sound like he's going to be back that soon. Juwan Jennings wants a new contract and is dealing with an injury. So how much of it is the contract? How much of it is the injury? Only he knows, but there's a chance that he misses the start of the season as well. It's not like they have a ton of depth at wide receiver outside of that. They already lost Deebo Samuel, and Samuel does some of the things that McCaffrey can do. Like Samuel was running the ball a couple of times a game. He was doing things that McCaffrey lines up in the slot or out wide. Those are plays that used to go to Deebo. Some of those plays could be going to McCaffrey again. So we could still see McCaffrey getting a ton of usage, and even if it's two running backs on the field to help make up for the problems that they're having at wide receiver right now, because like it's Ricky Pearsall, who had some good games last year, but didn't quite live up to the hype and was pretty much disappeared in a number of games. And outside of that, like they added Demarcus Robinson. They have some other younger, unproven wide receivers. They've had a very constant change of veteran wide receivers that they have been adding and dropping pretty much daily at this point, like Quantimus St. Brown, Robbie Chosen, or whatever his name is going by at this time. It's been like 3 or 4 guys, and they've been like adding them and cutting them, but it's just been a constant change on the depth chart. So there's going to be some random veteran wide receiver who's getting involved. So they might need McCaffrey to get that same workload, even if it's not the best for his long-term health.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think, yeah, it probably does depend on who else is available for them. Because yeah, right now they're looking pretty banged up, and dealing with a shaky situation. Maybe they'll trade for Terry McLaurin or like Tyreek Hill or something like that, and really shake things up. But yeah, I'm with you. I think there's definitely possibility too that yeah, they maybe they do have to rely on him. It increases his injury risk, but I guess you do what you got to do, right? So I'm sure they're more concerned about winning right now. But let's take a look at a rookie running back next, Nate. RJ Harvey is currently going as the RB22 on Yahoo in the 6th round of fantasy drafts. And this is a guy who we talked about quite a bit around draft time, but it's been a while. So definitely worth revisiting our second rookie to make the list today. But I remember at draft time, Harvey was like one of the biggest rookie risers coming out of the NFL draft, thanks to the 2nd round draft capital, but also landing in Sean Payton's offense with the potential to dominate touches out of that backfield. Now, there's still potential of that happening, but it's at least slightly less likely now with the signing of J.K. Dobbins, who has more experience and has at least played relatively well when healthy on like early downs. And that at least is more of a strength for him, for Dobbins, I say, than on passing downs, which might be an area where Harvey now becomes kind of the favorite. Now, that could mean that, the early downs belong to Dobbins, or that they split those early down carries with Dobbins getting slightly favored, in which case we're seeing, the risk now in investing in Harvey as RB2 for fantasy. The reward is that we have never seen J.K. Dobbins be healthy for an entire season, as he's consistently missed time with some kind of injuries, and the likelihood of him playing an entire season this year is low considering that history, right? In which case, RJ Harvey, being the 2nd round rookie that he is, as long as he proves capable, could be that workhorse back out of the backfield for the Broncos. And if he holds down that passing role on an offense that has a strong tendency to target the running backs out of the backfield, then there's a lot more upside here than just kind of a low-end RB2. So another tricky situation to sort out, Nate. What are your thoughts on this Denver backfield, and I guess Harvey specifically heading into 2025?
I do think there is a lot to like, and I have been finding myself drafting him a lot. I've been finding myself including him in those perfect draft strategies a lot. He was great as a runner in college. PFF rushing grade amongst Power 5 opponents was 93.4 over the past 3 years, which was just ahead of Blake Corum, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson. So was very good as a runner as well as a receiver. So I think he was capable of doing everything in that offense. I think there's been a pretty positive buzz about him in general throughout training camp after they've signed J.K. Dobbins, just play after play that he's made. So even though it hasn't been like a thing of like he's the clear starter or anything like that out of training camp, it's a lot of talk of he did really good on this play and this play and this play, and both in the run and the pass game. I think the one thing that's probably been most concerning that I've heard is maybe some of that pass blocking isn't there as much as it is for J.K. Dobbins. So maybe we see Dobbins a little bit more on those third downs or some of those passing situations. But I think if they were to split the backfield like 50-50, both of them played 50% of snaps, I would rather Dobbins play on third downs and Harvey play in other situations than vice versa, since third downs is not when running backs score their fantasy points. It's when they're sometimes staying into pass block. It's when the offense is trying to get first down, throw it deeper down the field, not necessarily throw it to the running back as much. So you want a receiving running back, just you want them to play on early downs on receiving downs. So I think Harvey should play a decent amount. I think it'll pretty much be those two in the backfield. Probably my big concern is not so much the fact that Dobbins is there, but the fact that there's a bunch of other running backs that are there that Denver has said that they are excited about at some point of time. And we saw how ridiculous that running back rotation was last year. We saw them say they want to get Audric Estime more involved 3 or 4 different times throughout the season, and it never happened. At least the week after they said they want to get him more involved, it did eventually happen here and there. But we saw that kind of ridiculous usage, and like right now we are in preseason. I'm very excited about it. I'll have my recaps up on the site immediately after. I'll be posting about it a ton on Blue Sky, so excited for the preseason. But Denver was the one team that like was the most confusing during the preseason. It was very much play the veterans early and then the younger guys later on. We saw Samaje Perine get work with the ones. We saw Tim Patrick get work with the ones. Neither of them made the roster. And then it was the younger guys who played later on. So while I'm excited about Harvey in general, I'm not expecting to get much out of anything out of this preseason. I expect J.K. Dobbins, if he's playing in the preseason, to be playing with the starters, and then Dobbins and Harvey having to play a little bit later. And I don't think that means anything whatsoever for the regular season. I think the only thing that would matter to me is if they're kind of splitting work with the ones, if they're playing the ones, and see how they are splitting that work. But I think Harvey is someone that I'm still going to take chances on. I think you have to still draft other running backs and make sure you have a backup plan if you're getting Harvey, but I think that upside's there for him to be at least a top 15 running back if everything's going right.
Yeah, I'm with you, and that's good insight there too for kind of what to expect on what their preseason usage might look like this year, and not overreacting to J.K. Dobbins, being the lone starter with the ones or something like that, or the first quarter, whatever it happens to be. But yeah, I'm with you. I tend to really like RJ Harvey still this year, like even with the addition of J.K. Dobbins. Like, yeah, I do expect them to be to both get work out of the backfield, but I do think Harvey ultimately has more upside and hopefully will be the healthier back this season as well, which is only going to help, right? So yeah, still like RJ Harvey quite a bit. So yeah, we got one more running back to cover today, Nate, and it was one of the biggest winners I think coming out of the NFL draft. That was DeAndre Swift, who right now is being taken as the RB26 on Yahoo in the 7th round. Last year he finished as the PPR RB20, but now he has an improved situation kind of all around him. But I think the question is he good enough to be a potential workhorse in 2025 for the Chicago Bears? So what are your thoughts on Swift right now?
Right now, I have been moving him up my rankings a little bit, and I think I'll continue to be moving him up the rankings because it seems more and more likely that Swift is going to be the main guy in this offense. We know they have the new head coach in Ben Johnson, who came from the Detroit Lions, and they were very used to having a two-man backfield. We saw that with multiple running backs taking those different roles, but it doesn't seem like that's where they're heading, at least so far this year, from what I've heard. It sounds like Roschon Johnson, who's been the clear second running back on the depth chart. There's been talk of him taking goal line snaps, and talk of him taking short yardage situations, but I haven't seen anything suggesting he's going to be the starter the same way that David Montgomery was a starter or that Jamal Williams was a starter in Detroit. So I think we could see Swift having a bigger role than what we saw any of the Detroit running backs having in recent seasons, in which case he might not be scoring as many touchdowns because there's a chance Roschon Johnson takes those touchdown situations away. But I could see Swift definitely getting double-digit carries each week. I could very well see him getting 15-plus carries each week. And then when you throw in the offensive line, which they spent the entire offseason completely reworking, it should be one of the better run-blocking offensive lines in the league. A lot of the guys they added, they are better run blockers than they are pass protectors. So it seemed like the offensive line rebuild was more to help the run game than it was to help Caleb Williams. So I think Swift has the upside of being a top 10 fantasy running back this season, but there's also the chance that Johnson does take those goal line snaps and takes all the touchdowns. And their 7th round pick has also gotten a decent amount of buzz throughout training camp. So maybe a chance Swift does take a little bit of a backseat to some of the other running backs. Maybe they end up trading for someone. So he's kind of probably the biggest risk reward running back for me, in that he's a chance to be a top 10 guy, but also a chance that like maybe they trade for Breece Hall or someone else who's in the last year of their contract. And then all of a sudden Swift is nowhere to be seen on the depth chart.
Yeah, and look, for him, he wasn't good last year, right? Like I think that's why it was a surprise to kind of not see him replaced in the draft or up until this point through free agency, right? He averaged a career low 3.8 yards per carry across 17 games. So I get why he's being drafted in that RB 24 plus range. But like you said, everything around Swift has greatly improved, including the offensive line, the team's receiving weapons, and potentially at head coach with Ben Johnson coming in to run the offense. Like if this offense is able to take the leap that they're expected to with Ben Johnson and all the upgrades, Swift can easily be one of the top beneficiaries. As right now, like the clear lead back in this offense, he's going to get, I think, an increased opportunity to score, even if not the primary lead back on goal line or short yardage situations. Like just being a part of that offense and being the RB1 there is going to lead to more chances in the high scoring areas of the field, to potentially have more to work with before contact as well. Like you said, with that run blocking offensive line, there's definitely room for improvement there, or at least for him to regress closer to his career norm in terms of efficiency, right? And if that's the case, then all of a sudden, yeah, Swift does become a potential top 12 or higher running back for fantasy. But like you said, there's risk of him continuing to play at a below average level, being replaced by someone in that backfield, whether it's Roschon Johnson or 6th round picks Kyle Monongai, who I believe is working as the RB2 right now. So they're still kind of working through who else is going to be playing behind Swift, but it seems like Swift, his position is not in doubt, right? So he's not going to be immune to, I think, losing his job this year is the main thing if he doesn't play well enough. But he's at least right now pretty clear as the RB1. So he'll have the opportunity to get back on track here in 2025. And he's old, 26 years old as well. So he's not old by any means. We've seen each of our past 3 RB1s overall older than him the season that they delivered. So we shouldn't rule him out here, but yeah, like after what we got from him last year, I think there's still definitely risk involved. Okay, let's wrap up with our lone high risk, high reward tight end on the list today. That is Baltimore Ravens, Mark Andrew. He is being drafted as the tight end 7 right now in round 6 on Yahoo. And for anyone who watched our breakout tight end episode, you might remember us talking about like the diminishing workload of Mr. Andrews as Isaiah Likely has begun to emerge as a legitimate receiving threat in his own right. And Likely is going to be, I think, a big part of why maybe we shouldn't be overly bullish on Andrews for 2025, despite still delivering a strong fantasy season last year. Obviously, he had the slow start, Andrews, which I think partly did him being banged up. But from week 5 on, he was the PPR tight end 3 overall for fantasy. The problem is he's working on this diminishing workload, like I mentioned earlier, as he's essentially split his time closer to 50-50 with Isaiah Likely in the passing game. And in certain situations, Likely is even playing a little bit more. So Andrews, he was also helped quite a bit by a career high 11 receiving touchdowns last year, all of which came once he got out of that first month of the season. But again, as good as he is, and considering Likely's role, it's going to be difficult to kind of replicate that. Now, there is at least some injury scare here with Likely, as he hurt his toe in camp. He's currently questionable for week 1, which is where Andrews' value potentially skyrockets any time that Likely misses time. And getting that potential top 3 tight end at tight end 7 prices does become a huge reward, right? And look, I think Likely will have to miss time for that to happen and to allow Andrews to thrive once again. But it's definitely possible, especially as he's currently on the shelf. So, Nate, tight end 7 for Andrews. What are you thinking with him at that price?
Yeah, I have him a little bit lower than that in my rankings because of the risk. I think the reward is very clear. He is still one of the highest graded tight ends in the NFL. Even last year, he was amongst the highest graded tight ends. So I think he has the talent to be a top 3 fantasy tight end. He's been that in the past at times, and he is a big touchdown threat, which showed last year. He scored a ton of touchdowns, especially near the end of the season, and that's a big part of why his fantasy finish was so high at the end of last year. But he wasn't as consistently making catches because he wasn't as consistently getting targeted, because he wasn't as consistently on the field. Like you mentioned, him having that strong end of the season. For a decent part of that time, Charlie Kolar, who is their 3rd tight end, missed and was on injured reserve for a bit. So Kolar is someone who consistently on the field in 22 personnel, often on the field in 21 personnel. So it was really that 22 personnel where Mark Andrews was on the field more often. Those are the kind of formations that are often used near the goal line. So that means Mark Andrews got to be used more towards the goal line. And they still like Charlie Kolar. There's been plenty of positive things said about him, not just his blocking, but his receiving during training camp this year. So I expect as long as Likely is out, that's going to be huge for Mark Andrews. Ideally, they use more 12 personnel this year, which they're already like the team that uses 12 personnel the most out of everyone. We saw it like especially in week 1, and then they moved away from using it as much as they used week 1 last year, which was annoying for fantasy managers. But if anything, like they added DeAndre Hopkins this year. So if anything, I'd expect less 12 personnel because they added another wide receiver, but they still like the tight ends. So like a lot just depends on how much they like Andrews this year compared to how much they like Likely, since once they're healthy, only one of them can be on the field in 11 personnel. It was a pretty clear mix last year. It ended up being around 60% Andrews, 40% Likely in the games that they were both healthy, but there's a chance that changes. There's a chance that Andrews sees more of that because Likely's been injured now. So I'm lower on it because I think Likely will be able to turn, and then I think Likely and Kolar will both still see significant playing time, which will diminish Andrews' playing time, and I think the touchdowns will probably regress a little bit. So because of that touchdown regression, I have him lower, but he's still, like, if things go right, he's still a top 3 tight end in the NFL in terms of talent, and can therefore finish that way in terms of fantasy if his usage ends up changing.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you all for tuning in. And if you would be so kind as to like and subscribe to the podcast, we'd greatly appreciate that. Also, don't forget to use promo code EARLYBIRD and save 33% on a PFF Plus subscription until tomorrow, August 7th. Get in there, and so you don't miss out on all the PFF player grades, tools, and locked written content. Speaking of which, Nate, let everyone know what you have going on over at PFF.com right now.
The big new thing this week is we have preseason games on Thursday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we'll have pretty constant ongoing fantasy recaps. I'll have them updated after each game. So some nights and days, the games are on at different times. Thursday night, we got a 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern game. So I'll be up late Thursday night getting that recap done as well. So the constant recaps, along with all the perfect draft strategy articles, all the top 5 lists, all the rankings are constantly being updated. Also, next week after the preseason, we'll have depth charts up on the website based on all of the preseason usage. And we've also got some fun things cooking for in-season. I know in-season have had the content be pretty much the same each year, but I've got a couple of new pieces that should be in the works and getting released this year that I'm excited to show you. So definitely take the time now to subscribe to PFF Plus, because it's the cheapest you'll get it, and you'll get access to all of those new fun articles in the regular season.
Love it. Yeah. And then as for me, I've written up my Superflex draft strategy articles for the four main pick ranges this week: picks 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, as well as Dark Horse IDP 1 candidates. I'll also do a short form YouTube exclusive video covering that 1 to 3 pick range strategy for Superflex this week. And then I'll be back on the podcast talking IDP sleepers on Friday. So lots to come here. We got preseason this weekend. We'll break that down one way or another next week on the podcast as well. So be on the lookout for that. And until next time, peace out.